Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Title Scoop. So this week we're going to talk about federal tax liens. We're probably going to talk about it for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3, because I want to go over the basics this week and then start touching on how to handle them when you see them, and then some specific scenarios when you see them, when they take priority, and then how they're sometimes handled differently depending on the situation. So this week we're going to talk about the basics. And first off, what is a federal tax lien? A federal tax lien usually arises when a taxpayer fails to pay their taxes owed to the United States, or the IRS determines that the taxpayer's tax returns are deficient for the funds that are owed. So you don't pay your taxes that are owed either to the federal government, right, the United States, or the IRS has determined you haven't paid the right amount, then you can get a federal tax lien. Now, we often see it, like I said, for non-payment of federal income taxes, withholding taxes, Social Security taxes. But honestly, for our purposes, we don't necessarily care why they got it. We care that it's affecting our property and we need to clear it up. So a little fun fact, I found this interesting, is originally federal tax liens attached to property and a BFP could actually be affected. So a bona fide purchaser, if they bought a property from a delinquent seller, so the seller owed federal taxes and hadn't paid them, and there hadn't been a lien filed on against that seller, the BFP actually took the property subject to those federal taxes. However, Congress realized this was an issue and revised 26 USC 6323 and basically said the Internal Revenue Code needs to be changed and provides that the filing of the federal tax lien has to provide constructive notice. So they need to file a federal tax lien or notice of federal tax lien and record it of record so the buyers do have notice. So as a result of that, if a bona fide purchaser purchases a property and they don't have notice of the federal tax lien, they're not going to take subject to that federal tax lien or the federal taxes, right? So IRS liens are general liens. That means they attach to all the property the taxpayer has, not just the address listed on the federal tax lien. So that's something that's misunderstood a lot. I get calls from agents and they're like, hey, I have a seller, they're selling their property. However, there's a federal tax lien out there and it doesn't have the same address. So can we remove it? And the answer is no. The federal tax lien attaches to all the property of that person. So even though the address is there, that address is really for informational purposes only. And we need to be really careful and make sure that that federal tax lien is paid off if it is against our person. The other thing that's sort of interesting, this is a fun fact, it also attaches to inherited property. So if you inherit a property and you have a federal tax lien and you're like, oh, I don't want it to attach to that, I'm going to disclaim it, it actually does attach. So that's just a fun fact about federal tax liens and their attachment to inherited property. So the other time that it attaches, and sometimes people try to avoid these federal tax liens, they try to create an entity or a DBA and they put the property in that to try to avoid the federal tax lien. But if the IRS determines that you have an alter ego and it's in fact the taxpayer or you, they're going to enforce that lien against the assets of the entity. So again, if I have a sole proprietorship and I really have just done it so that I can try to avoid, or if the IRS determines that it's one and the same, they're going to come after. So I do always tell people, be really careful if it's a single member LLC and the federal tax lien is against that person. You really need to be careful to see whether it attaches. And a lot of times we may err on the side of caution and want to pay it off. So how long are these good? They're good for 10 years, 30 days from the date of assessment. And the best practice really is that you should wait 30 days past that final refiling. So some underwriters take the position that 1 day past the last day of refiling, you can say it's released. However, if you look actually at the law, it states that the IRS has 30 days from the last day of refiling before the lien automatically releases. So best practice is probably to wait 30 days past that date just so that we know we don't have to worry about it. Again, we're going to go over some of this stuff as far as title next week and some specific scenarios, maybe next week, maybe the week following. But the interesting thing about federal tax liens is these are some of the only self-releasing liens. They have the language on it. And if we're past that date, past the 30 days, we can consider those released. You will sometimes see a release filed. They also file certificates of non-attachment. Sometimes they withdraw the federal tax lien. And if you see anything like that, give your underwriter a call. We're happy to look at it to determine whether or not you need to show it on your commitment. So with that, we're going to call it a week and we will talk about more federal tax liens next week. See you next week.